And now I'm going to bring to the stage our guest programmer, Richard Linklater. Thanks, Lars. Thank you guys for being here. I'm looking so forward to looking and talking about another film besides my own. I'm really into Sam Fuller tonight. How many Fuller fans here? Everybody. Fuck yeah. You know, the other films in this series I can tell you about, like, where I was, what theater I saw this film in, what it meant to me. This film's very different than all the others you'll see in this series for the next several years, according to Lars. Because this film wasn't available in the 80s. It was a rumor, it was a myth, it was a legend, but you couldn't see it. It was it was a suppressed film. I don't know if it was technically censored, but it was definitely suppressed, dumped, and unavailable. And for, you know, cineasts, the idea that Sam Fuller, almost 70-year-old Sam Fuller, had made another movie was so exciting, but you couldn't see it. It didn't get released, and for various reasons. We'll have a long discussion after, Lars and I, but damn it, if the only way you could see it, I saw it on a, George Morris had a VHS copy dubbed off. It had played on a few cable networks briefly, you know, 4 in the morning kind of thing. So maybe you could watch it on a VHS if you got lucky, but it was really unavailable. So I've only seen this film once on that crappy VHS. But it's so exciting tonight to get to see it in a 35mm print. Thank you, Lars. And I know Criterion has a version out. But you know, Sam Fuller is like a god to all filmmakers. My favorite quote about him is from Scorsese. He says, you know, Sam Fuller's sort of like the Rolling Stones. If you don't like, I mean, if you love rock and roll, you kind of have to like the Rolling Stones, right? If you love cinema, you have to like Sam Fuller. It's that simple. You know, to understand Sam Fuller, he's the ultimate maverick. He, you know, I got to know him a little bit. I'll tell stories after, but I was around him for a chunk of time in 1990 and 1993. I have a good story. I even went swimming with Sam Fuller. And we had a series in the 80s called Cinema Fist. And it was the films of Robert Aldrich and Sam Fuller. And I think that was a French term for Fuller, or some other term, I'm not totally sure, but Cinema Fist. And that really does describe Fuller's cinema. You know, even in the 50s, when films are shot a certain way, he would have, I think one of my favorite close-ups in film history is from Pickup on South Street. You know, this pickpockets work in the subway, and just these dynamic close-ups, just pow, you know, right in the face, punch. You know, so hence Cinema Fist. But he was that kind of visceral filmmaker, a total outsider maverick. You know, when he was you got to understand his life. You know, he was born in 1912. He, as a teenager, he was writing, you know, he was a journalist. Sam Fuller, he directed all these movies, but he was a writer. He was a writer's writer. He was writing from the time he was very young to the day he died. As a teenager, he was writing for newspapers, kind of the crime beat. He was hanging out at, you know, morgues and, you know, crime and kind of low life. He's a tabloid journalist who just had a nose for kind of the underbelly of society. And so, you know, and then in his 20s, he started writing, I'm thinking when he was 22, he wrote his first novel, Pulp Fiction, called Burn, Baby, Burn. He had other titles like Test Tube Baby, and he just, you know, the guy was on fire. He'd grab something from real life and write a script about it, write a story. He drifts into screenwriting. You know, he goes to war. He's an infantryman. You know, his 20s he's writing and traveling, but he drifts into screenwriting in the 30s. Goes to war in the early 40s. He's on Omaha Beach, you know, Normandy invasion. He's there, survives, liberates a concentration camp at the end of the war in Czechoslovakia. So he had really been through it. He drifts to Hollywood, and from like 1949 to like, let's say 64, 65, he makes 17 films, and his reputation lies really in that period. Just over and over, just some challenging film. But he kind of had the studio system. He worked with Daryl Zanuck at Fox, and he was in and around the studio system, always a maverick, but he was kind of indie before there was even a word for indie, when he would go out on his own and make a film. So, but his career sort of declines like so many. The studio system changes and more or less collapses in the mid-60s. And so Fuller, he just has a tough time. From 65 to 80, he makes like one film. But he's blessed with a long life, and something great happens. You know, the auteurs, the French loved him. Godard puts him in, they started putting him in movies. He's just he's the ultimate like auteur embodiment of it. I think what you call an auteur, he's the exponent of that, along with a few other directors. And they weren't the hoity-toity Oscar winners. What they loved were, Hitchcock and Fuller, and that's who they considered real, that's the directors they loved the most. And so the legend grows, and his reputation just builds over time. And then by 1980, he gets to finally make this film, The Big Red One, which is about his that World War II experience, the Normandy invasion, and his troop. So Lee Marvin's in that. He didn't have a good experience on that. Apparently there's like a 5.5-hour version that he loved, and the studio cut it down, so he didn't. I don't know, does that exist? Is there a long version of Big Red One?
There's a longer one, there's not a 5.5-hour.
There's not, but yeah, so he was kind of burned by that. But the good news is, it was Sam Fuller's return to cinema. The guy's in his late 60s, but he's back in the industry a little bit. And so he gets a call. He's about to make another film. He gets a call from Paramount, cool producer John Davison, did Airplane. He had just done Airplane. And he goes on to do RoboCop. And one of the cooler producers, loves cinema, a former student of Scorsese's at NYU, who I imagine with Scorsese as his teacher, he infused him with a lot of Fuller love. So, a generation goes by and these guys find out, they're older, but they're all the guys running Hollywood, really look up to him. So they're throwing projects at him. So one of the most ironic factoids in this whole 80s series, I have this premise that, these gems in the 80s are pretty crappy. There are all these bad films being made, but, these films, they do sneak through the cracks, somehow. Who's the executive who greenlit White Dog at Paramount, who had a meeting with him, said he loved him, wanted to make the next, is Don Simpson, the guy who does Flashdance, Beverly Hills Cop, and Top Gun. You could almost say he was like what was wrong with the 80s, but from a cinematic standpoint. But he was kind of the new Hollywood, the high concept. He greenlights this fucking movie you're about to see. So there's nothing simple in this world, and I love him for that, if nothing else. But of course, there were rumors at the time. We were in the genre of, don't forget, it's early 80s. A few years before, 5 years before, so there had been a movie called Jaws. So this notion of like animal horror, like an animal horror film. I think they like that. They even called this, someone pitched it as Jaws with paws. So anyway, there's this book from the 60s. It's a civil rights era book. They pitch it to Fuller, who knows the author and knows the book very well, and gets all excited about it. Fuller was very excitable. And so he jumps in, his younger friend, there was a writing strike looming. And Hollywood gets nervous when there's gonna be a strike and they won't have product. So this rushes through the pipeline pretty quickly. His young friend, Curtis Hanson, the wonderful director who goes on to do LA Confidential, In Her Shoes, Wonder Boys, 8 Mile. He's a friend of Fuller's. And they adapt this book to, they update it, I guess, and it goes through the system rather quickly, and they get the film made on a pretty, moderate budget. And he gets a wonderful cast. I really love Paul Winfield in this movie. That's one of the reasons I wanted to show it, just to think about Paul Winfield. He was, at this time, I think, there's a big film from my childhood, and everyone anywhere near my age, Sounder. It's a Depression-era story of a sharecropping family, and he's the father who's arrested and comes back and reunites. It's about his son mostly, but he's just a wonderful actor. And in this, he's very sensitive. He's the animal psychologist who's trying to retrain this dog. Christy McNichol plays the young actress who kind of accidentally, I think she hits the dog, and adopts it, gets it well, and then realizes this dog has been trained to attack black people. So she takes it to Paul Winfield's character, and instead of putting it down, he wants to change it. He wants to see if he can reprogram it, that this is a, at the time when I saw it, I thought this is sort of an old notion. I'd never heard of a dog trained to, other than ones on leashes by actual, government people. So it seemed like an older notion. I don't know if this is a film kind of out of place, but I think Fuller was nothing but adamant. He was just the ultimate, decisive guy. Racism, bad. Communism, bad. Democracy, freedom, good. He just, boom. There was no black and white with him, and it shows in his movies. But ironically, even though it's such a, the film asks, I feel like it's really asking, is racism, well, it's learned, but can you be deprogrammed? Can you unlearn it? I think that's the metaphor here in the movie, as I remember. So that's something we can talk about after. But he had his points to make. But don't remember, it's still kind of an animal horror film. I think there's some good gnarly murders. One in a church, I believe. So get ready. Sam delivered the goods, at all times. But he had a lot of verve and a lot of belief behind what he was doing. But like I said, this film was suppressed. There was threats of kind of a boycott. And I think some people from the NAACP, one guy in particular, came around the set and didn't know him, didn't know his history. Sam Fuller was integrating cast long before anybody else in Hollywood. He put his life on the line for freedom, but I think he just got swept up. It was the 80s. Welcome to the 80s, Sam. Welcome to the Reagan era. And Eisner and Katzenberg, who were running Paramount, they just thought it wasn't worth it. They just sort of dumped the film, which is really hurtful. To work so hard on something and then for the studio just to not even put it out. So that was it for him. He kind of moved to Paris for the next 13 years, made a few more films over there, but this was kind of it for Sam's Hollywood career. So it was a strange note for him to end on, but the film exists, and he did put his heart into it. So like I said, there's plenty to talk about. Hang out after. If you're interested, I got a few good Fuller stories. And, let's talk about the movie. I'm so interested to see it with you guys and see how it holds up. It's been, I think I saw this in '86, like I said, just once. And there's just not many prints of this. Has anyone here ever seen it on a print?
Oh, no.
Where?
Austin Cinematheque?
Yeah. This print's been available, but it just doesn't show a whole lot. So
The print's a little wrecked, by the way.
Yeah. But that maybe fits our genre here okay, too. So anyway, enjoy the movie. We'll be around after, so thanks for being here.
But no animals were harmed during the making of this. And in fact, there's even a story about how when they were filming this, and this is how much Sam Fuller loved animals, but they were filming a scene, and the grips needed to move, there was a piece of wood in the road or something. The grips went over to move it, and it turned out that there was a family of baby mice underneath it. So Fuller was like, no, let's just change our setup. No, just leave them alone. So that's how much animals were not harmed during that harrowing film we just watched.
It reminds me of Balthazar the Brisson, how much he gives all the animals who are in this place. They're close up, and you get to really hang out and feel all of them.
Yeah.
Didn't they use 5 different dogs?
Yeah, there's 5 different.
I read that, so I was looking closely to see if you could see any change, but couldn't really tell.
What a weird, insane movie that is.
Yeah. It really is. I'm so glad to see it again, though. God, it's funny how something just lingers in your mind for years and years.
I was so terrified to see it for a long time.
I was a little afraid, because I remember thinking it wasn't ever my favorite Fuller film, but it definitely stays with you. It's I don't know, I was so... Most Fuller films, the lead character is usually these lowlifes, some outsider, criminal, and the women are, the guys are got problems, and the women are often prostitutes. You know, that's kind of where he was coming from.
Yeah.
And here, all the people are so very sensitive. You know, I love Kristen McNichol in this movie. Winfield, of course. Burl Ives is great. You realize, oh, they're all kind of great. It's the dog's fucked up. You know, that's the the bad guy is this dog who has been trained. You know, so it's really.
But the bad guy's really that old man who trained the dog.
Oh, well, yeah, that's the bad guy.
He just gets it with both barrels from her, and it's just it's so
that's
nice.
Fuller. Like, we're just gonna, you know, lay into this guy.
I wish that scene was like 4 times as long as that.
No,
Just
that's
her
so
yelling.
creepy, that guy. Yeah, ooh. And you know that's Fuller's daughter, little Samantha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jodie Foster was supposed to play the Kristen McNichol role,
Right.
but honestly, she probably would have been better because she's just generally better. But Kristen McNichol has this sort of sensitivity.
Kristen McNichol, I think, is a really underutilized talent. She has a really sweet quality. For those youngsters in the audience, Kristen McNichol was on a show. Well, she was on a bunch of shows in the 70s, but I think the public knew her. She's very famous. You know, she was in a show called Family. She won Emmys, you know, as best supporting actress, and she was a big deal.
There's a great movie she's in with Warren Oates called My Old Man, based on the Hemingway story.
Oh.
She's really
I've
good in
never
that.
seen it. Yeah, I think she's got a great quality. I think she wasn't apparently. She just didn't have to act so much. I think she does other things.
Mhm.
You know, good for her. Maybe she's happier.
She had some kind of problem with depression.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I think she's
They
in and
called
out
it a
of.
chemical imbalance at the time.
She hosts a celebrity. I read some article on her in the last year that she was doing pretty well. She raises money for like abused kids and has a celebrity tournament in tennis or something. Lives out of LA. But, you know.
I want to talk a whole lot about this movie, but sometimes when you get lost in the discussion, you kind of will forget to get back to those stories that you were going to tell about Fuller. So I want to hear those right up front.
Oh, wow. You know, Fuller was so beloved, and I got to know why. You know, he was such a mentor and a mensch and just a great guy. When he died in '97 in LA, Curtis Hanson hosted a thing at the DGA, and it went on for hours and hours. Filmmakers from all over the world either were there or sent in testimonials. And we had our own tribute here. We showed some movies, and I remember just the full Alamo Drafthouse. I showed Shot Corridor and told some stories. But he was, you know, Peter Bogdanovich told a good story. When he was making his first movie, Targets, Fuller kind of took him under his wing and kind of worked on the script with him, had all these great ideas. If you know that movie when the killer, who's based on our own Charles Whitman, they're at a drive-in movie theater and he's hiding in the screen. He had this idea to be shooting from the screen to people watching the movie. Mm-hmm. So I'd forgotten the movie within the movie element. I mean, just that it's a backdrop of Hollywood. So he sort of always was commenting on cinema itself. But Bogdanovich said, you know, he just gave me these great ideas. He was such a generous guy and never even wanted credit or uncredited. And apparently he did that a lot. He ghost wrote a lot of things. And he was just such a good guy. I met him in 1990 at a film festival in France. He was living in France at the time. And he was just hanging out. He was just hanging out, smoking cigars, drinking wine, telling stories. So I went up to him at some point, and he just the kind of guy, grab your arm, what's your film? What do you know? He would talk to you, give you all his time. He was just a great guy. And then I was a little intimidated and kind of shy. I didn't really talk to him much. But then 3 years later, I run into him again. His daughter, Samantha, at this point, the little girl in the scene, is now a teenager. She's probably about 18 or 19, 20. And we're in Locarno, Switzerland. I'm showing my movie Dazed and Confused, and Samantha, I think, was talking to her. She had seen my other film, and anyway, she wanted to go. And she brings Sam Fuller to my movie, and you know, at that point dude's almost 80, and so I was really thrilled that he saw the movie. But he came out after, and he grabs my, that same kind of thing. He's smoking a cigar, he comes up to me, we're walking out. He goes, your movie concerns, he's talking about Dazed and Confused now. Your movie concerns an emotion I'm particularly interested in, and that's hate. I'm like, really? And he was obsessed with in that movie, the seniors who were so mean to the younger kids.
Yeah,
He said, those bullies. Those bullies! He just hated those guys. He was like, have you finished the movie yet? I'm like, he thought it was kind of like I could go back in, and he was giving me all these ideas to like, what you do? Get a baseball bat and shoot a scene where they're just hitting those guys. He had a new ending for the movie for me. And he just thought we should just beat the hell out of those guys with a baseball bat. Until it was so funny, but he really meant it. There was fire in his eyes. Just that injustice of them abusing these younger people. I saw it. It was intense. I thought maybe I should reshoot some stuff. But too bad that the film was opening about right then. But and then we hung out some more, and we were staying at the same hotel. And so he wanted to go swimming. Little 80-year-old Sam Fuller, and he's a little guy, this big white mane of hair. He was like a, but you know, we went swimming. He's like bobbing around in the water like a little drowned rat. You know, he was just incredible. His energy was just unbelievable. I don't know. I'll never forget him. And no one who ever met him. He's one of a kind, you know. There'll never be another like him. You know, that energy and just what he went through. If you want to read a good book, just about not just a life in film, but just a life in the 20th century, let's say, for a guy who lived it, you know, 85 years of it very fully and saw so much and went through every era, you know, of it with his eyes wide open. A Third Face is his autobiography. As much as he wrote, he didn't really write an autobiography to the end, and that only came out about 10 years ago, but it was posthumously put out by his wife. His wife's in this movie too. She's the nurse at the very beginning.
With a heavy German accent.
Yeah, she was German, Krista. And so it's a wonderful book.
It's getting hard to find, actually. I just saw a copy of it over at half price up on North Lamar.
Yeah, like I was saying before, Fuller was a writer. At the time of his death, he said he had written, like he had, you know, anyone accumulates all these films that they never get made, but he had registered like 100 scripts, ideas, treatments. He was just a machine of cranking out, you know, material, and so it was a pretty amazing career. But you know, he was just kind of an amazing guy. It was good to see him so revered. You know, a lot of people go out to pasture, but I think he was so well respected, and I think people liked him, just that spirit of his, that it was good to see him go out. You know, he was just sort of a hero to so many.
On this movie, they were a treatment had been written and it had gone around to Polanski and Arthur Penn and Tony Scott and all these different people were going to direct it. And it kind of finally, a treatment had been written by Curtis Hanson, and they wanted him to direct it, but they went to him, and he knew that he wouldn't have been able to get it together in time to beat the strike. So he suggested Sam Fuller to do it, and then the studio was basically like, well, if you work with Fuller and you kind of work with him to make sure that the script's not too outdated, that they let him work on it. But Curtis Hanson talked about how he was when he was working with Fuller, he was just like, are you sure you want to just go for it like that? And, you know, like, this is kind of a bold scene to have, you know, the guy attacked in the church in front of St. Francis of Assisi, you know.
Yeah, no, he would go all the way with that.
Exactly.
Don't you get it? Assisi. St. Francis. He loved animals, so what we're saying here is, you know, it meant something, goddammit. You know?
But it's almost like the other guy that would do that would just be John Ford. It was like, are you sure you want to go for this? And Ford would always say, you know, when you go for it, just go for it. You know, it doesn't matter if it feels sentimental or if it feels like over the top. You just go for it and make the best scene that you can.
I know, and he does that over and over through all his movies.
Yeah.
That's what people appreciate, that kind of just verve and spirit. You know, he just jumped in, man.
And also the other thing I want to mention is Paul Winfield, who makes this movie, I think, really. Who just really kind of he comes in the middle and just kind of carries it through.
Such a sweet face, you know. He had played few years before this, I guess in the late 70s. He played Martin Luther King, some big TV. You know, he was kind of the go-to guy there for a second.
It was really good in a movie that's kind of problematic called Gordon's War. It's Ossie Davis
Star
directed.
Trek too.
Yeah.
He had a big career,
Mike.
you know, a lot of TV, a lot of, you know, just such a nice quality. Winfield, very sensitive.
He seems like he's about to bust out laughing, but he just kind of carries his whole.
No, he goes in there. He has some That's a good actor. There's a
Yeah.
lot of ridiculous dialogue
Yeah.
that he has to ground that in a human
Yeah,
form.
yeah.
That's what actors do. Good
Yeah,
actors.
that's what good actors do
So,
really well.
But I was so impressed. Burl Ives has a great quality too. I don't know.
That scene where they're all eating dinner is just berserk. That's a berserk scene.
Yeah,
where
what is that? I don't know.
what the hell's going
What are they
on?
waiting on?
Yeah, the whole time I'm watching that scene, I was like, "What is this? Why? This is exactly the scene that just gets cut out of the movie.
I know.
Why is that in there?
I don't know.
It's so strange."
I don't understand that scene. I think I understand everything else, but that scene seemed to not be connected to other things around it.
Yeah, it's just so strange. Maybe it was,
That's the word. Like, I think the studio, there was a lot of, the myth built up around the movie that it had been sort of censored and all that, but I think the studio saw it, and it wasn't one of those animal horror films that they could, what can you really sell here?
yeah.
The attacks aren't good. They're not, say in a teen slasher movie, the teenagers who just had sex, well, yeah, we can kill them because they,
Right.
that makes sense. We can all,
Right.
whatever. But you can't, the genre.
Right.
But, there's nothing, the attacks here are so awful that there's nothing to,
And the
violence isn't fun violence. It's
And the ending makes you
horrible
feel so shitty when you walk out of the theater.
violence. Yeah, the message is such a bummer if you really think about it.
Yeah, it's like, wow, like, I love the fact this movie exists, but why?
Yeah, but what is the ultimate message?
Yeah, commercially, I mean, I
So-
couldn't blame
but-
them for not
But
releasing it.
and I don't think it was. I mean, it would have been released, but I think with a looming perhaps controversy,
Yeah.
people misinterpreting it, thinking, "Oh, it's a film that advocates dogs that attack like."
I don't see how anybody could think that possible.
Well, they hadn't seen the movie. No one
Yeah,
ever
okay,
saw the movie.
maybe.
It was just they're making a film about that, So
Let's
a little
open
bit
up,
of a
let's-
Huck
I want
Finn
to
thing
just sort of
there,
open up this discussion to
Yeah,
people in the audience, because I'm
please.
sure
That's
that a lot
what
of
we're
you
here for.
have points
I
here.
get sick of hearing ourselves. So any
I'm not
opinions,
sick of hearing
anything
you. I'm not sick of hearing you.
I'm never sick of you.
Right over here.
I thought that scene with them having dinner was actually pretty important because they really are bonding about this covert thing they're doing, and the policeman comes, and it's just a moment for them to kind of realize what they're doing and the bonding of the three of them. And so I thought that was actually...
But I thought it was like, because that guy in the church, that had just happened, right?
Right.
But so what's the...
Well, because
Results of
they're
that.
continuing on with that dog. I mean,
Are they hiding the body
Well, they're
somewhere?
hiding the dog. They picked up the dog and took him away. I don't think they reported anything about that guy getting attacked, did they?
That's kind of the... It's like,
It's kind of-
there's a person perhaps dead in a church, and they kind of our allegiance, it's a good narrative experiment. We're with the dog, that's the story here. Oh, maybe he ate somebody,
The
but...
guy didn't die,
Yeah, he said he
but
lived.
still.
Yeah, we're so focused on the dog story.
Yeah, I think, I was telling Brian, I think on the Criterion DVD, the cut from Paul Winfield putting the dog in the truck and then being at the place, I think there's a scene where he goes back into the church and sees the body. So I think that it's not, like in this it comes off as like Paul Winfield's like, well, the hell with that guy, he died, or something. But like, there's actually like a scene on the DVD where like he like walks in and like sees the body, and then it like cuts to like an
Does
scene.
someone call an ambulance? I don't know. I'm worried about
Yeah,
that.
it just seems like a lot more abrupt.
Yes, yeah.
So,
Well, so the Criterion version, is that officially like a restored, I mean, if you're saying there's scenes in it that aren't in this,
as I remember watching it, I watched it like last year.
this was the weird print. The print's okay, but there's like I think this print was one that was probably rejected, an early one, with the color timing
color
just
time-
jumps.
exactly, yeah, the color
And those
timing
aren't
really-
real changes, those are just
Right,
in mid-scene.
in between
The color
scenes.
timing it's an odd print, let's put it like that. But
And it's a print that looks, just from the way the fade is, it looks like it's an original, like 1982 print.
that's
So-
definitely a print from the era.
So that this may have been the print that they sent around and played, because they did play it in Detroit for a week.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
So it
that.
played in. They were like, I don't know, send it to Detroit.
The dumping ground of cinema.
So they sent it to Detroit for a week, and Detroit collectively just kind of did this. What do you want from us in this movie? And so then they were like, okay, send it to Europe, just send it to France, or just skip America altogether.
It played in Europe a little bit, right?
Yeah, and in Europe they liked it. That's Europe for you.
Well, some bigger comment on America, I'm sure, that none of us are like, what?
And for the record, I like it a lot too, but it is a baffling movie.
Yeah.
I
Well, that's Fuller, you know, there's some crazy scenes in even his best movies, there's some real head-scratching moments.
And it feels some of it feels real sort of pulp writerly in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, it has a lot of vigor to it, but in all his movies, there's always dialogue that is not naturalistic sounding at all. It just reads like a pulp novel in a way, but he sells it.
Yeah, he's always
with such vigor, you know.
Yeah.
I wonder if we have any other contributions from the audience. Yeah, right over here.
Just out of curiosity, but do you think they'll do like an inverse remake of this movie where it's a black dog attacking white people?
Well, you know, that is in the book apparently.
Yeah.
I've never read the book, but there's a kind of a guy who trains it. He's like a Muslim radical. He retrains it to attack white people.
Well, it was a true story, and Romain Gary, who wrote the book, which is a factual novel, it was called, was married to Gene Seberg, who you might know from Breathless, the show. And this is sort of the story of Gene Seberg finding a dog, and then that dog attacking their gardener, and then taking it to this Algerian militant guy to retrain the dog, and he retrains the dog apparently to then attack white people. So he like goes, you know, like 180 degrees when, you know, that's not exactly what they want.
Did he really, or did the dog just attack?
Yeah, who knows? It seems like
just an attack dog.
It seems like too good to be true.
You have a novelist in that,
right?
Maybe, you know, who knows?
Isn't that what happens in this movie? Because remember, the dog sees black and white, and when he trains it not to attack black, it looks like he's about to attack
I thought there was just circuit in the dog's brain to attack Burl Ives.
Well, that's the metaphor. You know, white racists, when they're not attacking, like they'll gladly attack a white person too.
Because the dog doesn't attack Kristen Nickel, you know.
But he's about to.
But it's because he's adoptively man. Did he remind him of the guy, of his trainer?
Oh,
That's the impression I got.
Okay.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it hadn't occurred to me. Yeah, that's totally it, actually.
He looks a lot like that guy.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And he's sad too. I can say that.
All right, contribution of the night.
It
Yes.
all makes sense. We just weren't given it a chance. It's all there.
Right back here. Yeah.
This movie was made in 1981, I guess. I was an agent in LA, and we had a young actor that was up for the part of the boyfriend. I can't remember his name. And so I went over to I talked to Mike Fenton, who was the casting director, and asked him to send me the script, and he refused. And he said Mr. Fuller would not allow the script out of the office, so I had to go over and sit in his waiting room and read it. And that's fairly common in later years, but that was the first time I had ever incurred that. And I think it was because they knew even ahead of time that they were going to have problems with the public.
Yeah, just the premise of they were in some kind of shaky ground. But that's what's kind of cool that a studio would even go near.
Well, exactly. The strike was coming, and it was like, yep.
Yeah, right now. The
So
strikes
I
pretty good.
find
They need sometimes. You know.
They had also paid a lot of money for the property, and it was just kind of sitting around.
Over the years.
Yeah.
They've had it since
The 60s, right? The
Mid-70s, yeah.
When it was
Bob Evans bought it.
right. It's just funny anyone ever thought it would be.
Yeah, it's so strange
That Hollywood at that time thought they had a hot property on
But during the early 70s, as you know, during the early 70s, Hollywood was just in a total tailspin, and they had no idea where Magnetic North was. They just didn't know what the hell the public wanted.
Yeah, this is still, a lot of the films we're showing in this series are still kind of leftovers from the 70s, and this literally is the subject matter, the development of it, everything about it. They don't know the 70s has ended yet.
Sure.
But just the idea that it got made and not released, you see something slowly grinding to a halt.
Yeah, it was.
Films like this.
What we see in this series a lot is there's a lot of beginnings, you know, and then there's a lot of endings, and then there's a lot of, particularly among the European directors, like just a fat part of their careers, you know, the continuity of what they're doing. I wonder if we have any other contributions from the audience about this insane movie.
I'm not as insane as we think. Right?
Right. Who was the thing? Oh, right over here.
You guys were talking about the dialogue, and I wanted to I wanted to point out that Burl Ives' character is the only believable character, the way he speaks in that movie, because he's so insane. Do you think that that's kind of a statement about this movie, just how ridiculous it is? Or do you think he did that on purpose?
I don't agree with you, actually.
You don't?
No, I don't.
What in particular do you enjoy about this film?
What? You mean like, are you saying everything out of Paul Winfield's mouth and Christy McNichol's mouth? You don't?
So repetitive and over the top.
You don't believe in character?
What's that?
Oh, well.
I don't believe their characters. I think maybe it's more of a product of the popularity of cocaine. There's part of the reason why some of these movies.
I enjoy this movie a lot. I mean, for the record, anybody else really enjoy this movie a lot?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
You're in.
It's totally cool not to enjoy the movie, but I enjoy this movie a lot. And it's very writerly, and it's not naturalistic.
For the record, my favorite Fuller movies are Park Row. You know, when I was talking earlier about he was a journalist at a very young age, and that's kind of his beautiful homage. It was an early film of his, I think 52 or 3, you know, and it's a wonderful film about just kind of tabloid, you know, journalism. That's a good one. He made so many. He made a lot of great war movies too. So he's all over the map. He made all kinds of films, but.
Yeah, his war movies are very different than other war movies. They just have like a real sort of, there's a different kind of, it's like an anti-mythology happening in his war movies.
Yeah, because he was there, like I said, you know, that guy really, I think war movies should only be made by people who fought in wars.
Yeah,
that's my feeling.
That's good.
You know, to the anti-myth. You know,
and then we have no more wars. We have no more war movies then.
Well, that would be a good start. No war movies would be a good start. Because I'm kind of sick of all these, you know, when like Saving Private Ryan comes out, it's like, oh, finally someone made a real war movie. It's like, I can give you, 7 Sam Fuller films?
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, they always think there's a new war movie but it's always made by someone who never fought, who's mythologizing, saying, oh, it's tough, but damn it, it's good. Fuller didn't, you know, it's kind of like, it's kind of sucks all the way. There's heroism, there's individual thing, but the big picture is.
Yeah, that leads me to a train of thought as we wrap up. When you watch a movie on the big screen, you notice things that you might not notice when you watch them at home. And one thing I noticed was the war movie on TV is They Were Expendable, when you see a little bit of that.
Which is,
And then you see when she's taking the book to her friend, it's Hitchcock Truffaut.
And then there's another Hitchcock poster in there, and then they mention Truffaut. Yeah, you can tell. I would think some of that's maybe Hansen, right? A young film guy.
But the most inexplicable one is that it's a full-on foreground shot where she's asleep, and it's Gene Fowler's book, Goodnight, Sweet Prince, about John Barrymore, that she's reading. That she would never have been, that character never would have been reading that book.
You're right, she would never. But yeah, you can tell they're just having fun. Like, what book? Oh, let's put in that one. You know, like that one.
It's so odd. It's full of odd little touches, and then the ending is just so crushing and terrible. It's just like, I'm gonna have nightmares about the ending tonight. I hope you guys, I hope it meant a lot to you, but I hope you don't have nightmares about this movie tonight, as I will.
Funny how you misremember. You know, the mind isn't very exact as much as you think it is. I swear, I saw this, 28 years ago on a VHS, but I swear the last shot was the dog running toward Paul Winfield and him reluctantly shooting it. I thought the movie ended right there. In my mind, other movies sort of end like that, you know, it's like a final thing, but I kind of conflated it. I don't remember.
Well, since there are obviously different cuts,
long.
It might have been.
I swear it was. He had that look on his face, and he has to shoot the dog. And I thought the movie ended there.
Yeah, that would have been a better ending, honestly.
Yeah, it was just this. Well, in my mind, it was better.
Ryan, fix up that print. So that's the ending of that print, and we'll send it back.
It's not too late.
Okay. So
anyway,
so next week we show a movie next week, and then we take like 2 weeks off for Texas Film Awards and South by. But the movie next week was one of the big ones for you.
Yes,
Reds.
Absolutely. Because who here's seen Reds on a 35 print in a theater though lately? We've all seen Reds, I hope. But
don't assume
on the
that.
big board. Yeah, you have when it came out. But I just really encourage you. It's just one of the great films. You know, it's in my top 10 of all time. So I just think it's not only one of the great movies of the '80s, but ever. And I think it doesn't quite get. It won Oscars. It is a big deal at the time, no doubt. But I still think somehow it's a little underrated, maybe because Warren Beatty is, a big star, and a personality. But I just think it's a wonderful film. It's just beautiful, so moving, epic. You know, it's just the U.S. rarely has produced a film kind of like that that's so politically smart and historic.
A great love story.
Great love story. Great woman's kind of coming of age story, you know, in her own, coming into her own. Very modern. You know.
So I just want to amplify that point. One of your top 10 favorite movies of all time.
I think it's one of the best. I mean, I haven't seen it. I saw a DVD of it. I guess they did a new one a few years ago. I watched it again and felt that way. But I'm just anxious to see it.
That's a pretty big recommendation because you've seen like 50 movies.
At least, maybe 100.
You've seen a lot of movies.
Yeah.
I just want to amplify that point. And so that's next week in same time, same bat station. So join us again for that.
I don't think I can overbuild that. I mean, that's got Jack Nicholson, it's got Stapleton. I mean, it's Jerzy Kaczynski. It's just a great cast.
Henry Miller.
Damn near. And then the witnesses, Henry Miller, George Jessel. I mean, it's as good as it gets, I think, in this world, you know? So.
As good as it is. Anybody writing this stuff down?
You can't. I'm not over. You can't overhype it. You'll like it if you haven't already seen it. So.
All right. On that note, we're going to see all of you here next week.
Bring your
except for the guy with that cap on over there. We'll see all the rest of you.
Yeah.
Right. We'll see all the rest of you here next week. Thank you very much, Rick.
Thank you, everybody.